Thank you. Thanks, Kat. Well, let's get into it and have a look at, how do we manage and transition government service agencies to be able to manage that risk for what is the target state when we start looking at government service agencies. And so if I just flick through my deck, one of the big things that we've seen for 2020 is, and it acts as a starting point, are the trends. When we look at a lot of the industry analysis that was done in terms of surveys, reports, IDG, Deloitte's, some of the big four management consultants, Forrester's, Gartner, etc. The key resonating factors when we looked at focus areas for 2020, and we did have to add one in, and you'll see the one that got added in. But certainly there were three core elements, and when we started to move through January, February, March, COVID-19 sort of hit us, and we'll talk a lot about the impacts of that. Certainly it needs to be spoken about because of the shift and the acceleration that it's causing in terms of our ICT strategies, particularly within government service agencies. And many of us were already on that journey. Our level of maturity and the stages that we were at in that journey was very much different, but certainly have accelerated now. And so how we manage risk towards our target state has certainly been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Resource management, that's always a key trend and focus area, not just for government service agencies, but across the industry alike. How do we do more with less? How do we reskill? How do we repurpose? How do we future-proof our resources that in order to redefine citizen experience, enhance productivity, develop and deliver competitive advantage for our business sector when it pertains to government services? How do we make sure that we've got the right resources, we've got the right investments, and we're able to continue to move down the path that differentiates us and makes us able to meet that customer citizen experience? We then start focusing in on other elements of the trends for 2020, and a really big one. We saw Scott Morrison's announcements around $1.3 billion spend to focus on cybersecurity, but in general, it's always been a key focus, as we moved out of 2019 into 2020, security and governance. How do we make sure that our policies, our guidelines, our legislative requirements are all in alignment with what they need to be as it relates to our individual government service agencies? And there's a lot of complexity there for government service agencies. Sometimes, in a lot of my dealings at a C level with private organizations, security and governance, multi-geos, when you're starting to go into addressable markets and different geographies, there are challenges around having to meet, a plethora of requirements, whether it's Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, as in health, and moving across GDPR if you're doing business in Europe. But the complexity from an Australian and New Zealand perspective as it relates to government is the legislative requirements of all of the different government service agencies. And then you add into that a more complex layer of third party and strategic ecosystem integration, not just with other government service agencies, but also those other areas and strategic partners that you may be doing business with or have a business requirement to integrate with that may be sitting in the private sector. Security governance as it needs to align to legislative requirements around privacy, data breaches, data security, as you move into a hybrid multi-cloud world, become quite complex. And so what you need to be looking at is, well, what do I have today, and how does that allow me to future-proof if I start moving my applications, my systems, my workloads, and my data sets into a hybrid multi-cloud ecosystem? And certainly when you then add in the complexities of software as a service, well, where's that data being maintained? How does that then impact data sovereignty? If I'm dealing with third-party strategic providers as part of core government suppliers, where is their data sitting, or where is the data that they have of mine sitting? So certainly security and governance is really a top trend there, when we start looking at that. As we then shift out and break out into the fourth one, digital transformation. So that's all around how do we take our current state and future-proof it into what it needs to look like, where essentially we're moving and transforming the citizen customer experience into more of a digital online set of platforms that are more automated, drive higher productivity, and deliver a completely enhanced and redefined citizen experience. And so certainly it's been accelerated. When we look at the year ahead, some of the stats, and they should resonate, with you as those that are in various roles within government. We look at more than half of CIOs that saying, stable growth remains the number one priority for 2020. And, COVID-19 has certainly initiated that and accelerated that even more so. 75% of those that were interviewed, across a global set of surveys, all unanimously agree that it's digital transformation is the number one activity to drive the top line revenue growth. Now, how does that relate to government service agencies when, top line revenue growth may not necessarily be, the key requirement or the key imperative from an organizational perspective? It's certainly around differentiation of services that allow you to be more efficient, that allow you to provide citizen experience and citizen services that allow us as a region and a nation to be able to compete more effectively in terms of third party and private business. That's where I see the big benefits that digital transformation drives from a government services agency perspective is the ability to provide an ecosystem with which our private sector can export differentiating services to make us as a region, us as a nation, globally competitive. That's where I see, highly effective, prioritized regions, have very, very strong digital transformation initiatives being driven from their government service agencies. And so what does that look like? It's all about driving business and citizen experience. A big quote here was, and we see it not just in government, but also private, but, that continuance around struggling in the marketplace with legacy IT mechanisms. You don't then necessarily have the budget or the manpower to be able to achieve the transformation that you're aspiring to. When we're looking at moving from, what might be constructed as a traditional on-prem set of systems and services, as you need to move that into more of an online, digitally connected, integrated ecosystem whereby your applications, your data, and your services are all spread across a hybrid multi-cloud set of environments. Where you pull the skills from, where you pull the relative level of investments from to successfully manage the risk towards that target state, becomes a real challenge if, a lot of work is being done in the ongoing maintenance of your legacy IT systems. And so that's really where we see, a big change in the need to move. And certainly when we look at the shift that is going on globally and even faster in the Australian, New Zealand market is where we started to see those historical elements of data management and looking at, the historical aspects of consolidation, virtualization, as well as then the move into private cloud. And that's how we started to see, that movement. Certainly from a consolidation perspective, we saw that traditional client server compute environment, start to envelop big, heavy applications, delivering a lot of system benefit around automation and productivity, but being of a distributed nature, and we had to go down that path of consolidation. VMware changed the game in the main with server virtualization and being able to really start to expand on the ability with being able to drive into, I'll turn that video off, thanks. With being able to drive into a virtualization layer that gave us the ability to look at the stack and drive into private cloud. And that's where we've seen that traditional, and well, not the traditional, but certainly the major shift as we're now going into more public managed commercial data centers and that hybrid cloud transformation. AWS, Azure, GCP, IBM, as well as VCSPs. There are a number down in federal government, whereby a number of different services, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, is being delivered out of federal government compliant managed service cloud providers. And so critically important to what your target state looks like in terms of the services and the apps and the systems that you need to provision for your government service agencies and businesses moving forward. So let's move on to, again, what's preventing it. And I've touched upon all of these, so I'll move through them fairly quickly. Lack of IT skills or transformative experience. These things aren't easy, and they're certainly using a new set of technology constructs. And so traditional IT skills that have been invested in with maintaining, what is arguably, legacy systems, legacy technology sets, as organisations and government service agencies need to go through that major shift, that dependency on those legacy systems will hamper, may hamper the legacy system transformation. What are those impacts? The positive impacts. The big one is around reducing business risk, revolutionising the citizen customer experience. That's a really, really big one. And I'm a very big advocate that if you're not driving digital transformation through enhancement of citizen customer experience, then you're investing in the wrong areas as it relates to digital transformation, and it's arguably not a digital transformation project. You've got to be able to redefine the citizen customer experience. And once I get through these, I'll hand over to Kat and try and get some interactivity, because not just with COVID-19, but certainly with my experience at a lot of industry events and a lot of face-to-face with C-levels and people such as yourselves, I've seen through the digital transformation assessment reports and the digital transformation initiatives that federal government is driving, all the great things that federal government is doing in this space. Big one is around cost. If you're not doing more with less, if you're not driving real cost savings, as it relates to government services and existing services, then, certainly that's one of the big positive impacts that you want to be driving as part of the business case. Modernisation, that's where we talk about that future proofing, business process re-engineering, being able to mitigate risk, security risk, business process risk, get more efficient with business operations to drive a better citizen experience is all around business process engineering, or at least modernising it. Increasing positive citizen responsiveness and transforming employee tasks. There's an obligation to future-proof the skills and the level of requirements that our employees will need to have within government service agencies to allow our government service agencies to continue to be competitive and deliver those sorts of services that our supply chains and our third-party business environments need to be able to export competitive differentiated services. I might just cut over to Kat and do a call around the room, and let's start drilling into some of those positive experiences that you have seen within your environments.
Yeah, so I think that's actually a good point to bring to the group here. There's two really good questions I think that come from this. Is one, you listed a couple of barriers that you can see, and I think that that's a pretty comprehensive list. But I would ask that the group, from your perspectives within federal government, what are there any other barriers that you're dealing with in this space that you could share with us? And I think also there's also that positive impact that we as industry, we experience with you as we assist you with these projects, but sometimes there are elements of that we are also not able to experience. So I just wanted to put that out to the group. Are there any barriers here that you see that you feel like maybe your peers could learn from, or any positives that you think you could see that we haven't already discussed here? I'm just going to give you guys a couple of minutes to come back to me, but I've got a couple of people who've put forward some thoughts here. So interagency data sharing, that's a really, really, really good point. I think that over the past couple of years, I've definitely seen a push for better interagency data sharing. There's been the sharing of government information to the public as well, and those data hackathons that have come as a result of that, which have really grown some creative solutions to the data problem. Thank you for that, Michael. Is there anything else that anyone wants to Any thoughts anyone might have about how this works for them? No, so I'll throw that one to you, Nathan. And any thoughts on the interagency data sharing?
Absolutely, it's pertinent, and it's a really great call out. You know, it's something I've been involved in think tanks from a government perspective over in Wellington in New Zealand. I was part, Tech in Gov I was part, and you know, open data and the sharing of data. When we talk about digital transformation and we unlock, you know, all of the benefits that analytics around data can provide to be able to drive, you know, the type of benefits that could be experienced across all government service agencies. You know, the real myriad of complexity, and it is not easy. And you know, I'm sure I'm coming at it from a vendor perspective, you know, in terms of trying to drive and assist with the problem solving. But you know, I remember sitting on a think tank, and it's absolutely pertinent to the Australian government service agencies as well, but it springs to mind because I was sitting in a think tank session in New Zealand only probably a year and a half ago around the challenges of open data. And you look at the construct of federal police, you look at the construct of community services, and the legislative requirements around sharing data as it pertains to child protection, for example. And there are very, very strong silos with respect to the data that can be shared just between those two functional government service agencies alone. And so whilst on the background we say, well, you know, leverage an API and, you know, be able to open those platforms in the right security parameters to be able to create, to the point of the person that raised it, the interagency data sharing, and you're good to go. Because once you put it onto a cloud digital platform and you're driving your data architecture that allows through an API process to get access to those data silos, then all of a sudden you can be cross-correlating the data, sharing the data, analyzing the data against third-party systems to help drive all of those actionable insights that, when they're siloed, may not be able to be drawn from that analytics. And then what you start to do is move down the legislative challenges of being able to share that data. There's particular data that absolutely cannot be shared with between caseworkers, you know, from a legislative requirement, you know, with the federal police, for example, and, you know, going through the legislative requirements of, you know, having to issue subpoenas and get access to that data. You know, all of a sudden there's these manual processes that are in place that don't make it easy to, you know, drive down that target state of an open data platform. And that's just one example. You then move it into the context of health data and issues associated from a privacy perspective, and then, you know, needing to share that with, you know, for example, you know, the ATO. The ATO probably seemed to be the one organisation in alignment with DHS that seemed to be moving down a path of open data sharing that, you know, allowed some of those barriers to move away. So, you know, the way in which, you know, the banks share data with Austrac, the way in which the ATO is able to get silos of data, not just from a private organisational, you know, data silo perspective, but also the data silos within other government service agencies. So it's an it depends question. Some government service agencies are able to get the interagency data sharing up and running in a more progressive way than others, but it is absolutely a big challenge, and probably sits as, you know, if you're looking at you know, open data as a big inhibitor to digital transformation, it's certainly a big one within government.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks, Michael, for your contribution there. I agree, it definitely does need a needs mapping exercise just to the volume of that data as well. It's very much a big data problem. So yeah, a very interesting topic of discussion.
And I'm not sure if anyone from DHS is on the webinar, Kat, but certainly, you know, I sat in another think tank with DHS, and they seem to be able to, you know, they were certainly, you know, leading in a number of their projects with respect to moving it into a digital online platform, in how they were able to completely automate end-to-end the citizen experience between inter-government service agencies, for example, around government benefits and government payments. So literally, you know, a citizen being able to apply for a particular government benefit online, and then DHS having access to systems and services in the back end that was able to correlate and do particular algorithms and business validation rules with, you know, getting access to that particular citizen's bank account details, where the whole process could be automated to allow them to, you know, get access to a particular government service or set of funds or government benefit in a completely online experience. So that's one example there where, you know, they were doing, you know, great things in that area, but I'm sure, you know, other government service agencies have a lot of challenges, and a lot of it ties around the legislative and policy and guideline inhibitors. So let's move on, and I'll flick through the slide. Risk reduction. Very, very simply, you know, one of the key takeaways when we start looking at transformation, and certainly from a Veeam and Data 3 perspective, what do we drive, you know, as the key simple approach to being able to mitigate, manage risk when you're taking your systems, services and platforms through a transformational exercise. You know, the first one, when you're starting to talk about core government service applications, workloads, data sets, is you need to be able to protect them, and you need to make sure that they're well managed, protected, and able to be recovered in the event of any type of data loss, data exposure, data breach, you know, from that transformation exercise or during that transformation exercise. And also look at protection irrespective of what you have currently, but where it is going into a future state. So what are the protection mechanisms that you've got on-prem? They need to be maintained if you're moving that data into a SaaS provider. They need to be maintained for a cloud service provider, or they need to be maintained for an Azure, AWS and or GCP environment if that's where you're moving them. Then you've got to move into the management space. How do we manage our systems and services and platforms today? And does that management change as we put it into a hybrid multi-cloud world? And what aspects of it change from a management perspective? Because it's not always the same depending on the outcomes that you're looking for, you know, when you're moving into a hybrid multi-cloud ecosystem. And that's where partner services really help you manage that risk in terms of understanding, well, we know what is going to change, but then how do we manage the respective operational change when we put them into those different cloud environments? And then the third part of it is the execution of the transformation. How are we doing it? What are we doing? What's the prioritized workloads, systems and data sets? And then executing and putting the programs, the resources, managing risk around people, process and technology to execute that transformation. So let's look at that journey and what it looks like if we start to drill a little bit under the covers of you know, data, and, you know, making sure that that is core and central, you know, to everything as it sits on a digital platform, and how our applications, systems, services and workloads need to tap into that. You know, that first element of protection, it's all about the ingestion of data. Where is it sitting? It's sitting in a sprawling set of unstructured and structured data sets across a myriad of applications, be it Kubernetes, container, serverless-based applications, sitting in traditional relational database management systems, or unstructured object-oriented you know, data sets. But at the end of the day, you've got to make sure that that data, irrespective of where it's sitting, is being backed up. It can be replicated, it can be moved, and more importantly, as part of an information and data classification and data management lifecycle, where it makes sense, you want to be effectively managing your data costs and moving those particular data sets into lower tiers of storage, lower tiers of archive, to be able to manage those costs, because we all know that data is exploding when you start looking at that hybrid multi-cloud ecosystem and the different types of data sets with which data is now being maintained. Then it's about managing it, integration, the approach in a hybrid multi-cloud world, what sort of data services, and where do we put the relevant policies around management to make sure we've got consistency and predictability across a hybrid multi-cloud ecosystem, irrespective of where it's sitting. Then it's about harnessing, leveraging all of the benefits once you've gone through that digital transformation exercise, whether it be large-scale programs or individual projects that may be siloed into individual business units to drive the quickest benefit. How do you then get all of those benefits and outcomes delivered to that government service agency business unit? You want to improve the customer citizen experience. You want to be able to unleash and expose access to completely new products and services that government services can provide on these new platforms. You want to improve customer citizen intimacy. How do you get your citizens and your customers driving and innovating and iterating what it is that you need to continue to provide for them, down the track? And then you want to, to that earlier question around interagency data, it's also about reuse. What do we have in all of our silos, in all of our structured and unstructured data sets, including our backup repositories as backup lakes? How do we reuse all of that to deliver additional services and better citizen outcomes and government service agency outcomes? And that's, really essentially that journey that we take a lot of organizations on. How do we focus on the benefits and what those benefits give you as part of that journey? It's broken up into three. It all starts with traditional backup modernization within a hybrid multi-cloud context. And we'll talk a little bit and dig into the detail of how we do that, the features, the functions, the capabilities that we break up the Veeam Cloud Data Management Platform into. We'll double down into specifically how that aligns to a Microsoft value proposition and what we're doing in not just government service space with Microsoft, but across a myriad of enterprises and top tier commercials when it comes to Microsoft. It's about how do we quickly accelerate that hybrid cloud transformation and transition for government service agencies to allow you to provide flexibility, mobility, as well as simplicity in being able to do that based on how you've prioritized the types of applications, systems, services, and data sets that need to go there. And then making sure that there's data security and compliance, and we'll talk about some of the specific features and functions. So let's now start looking at how we break down the technical pillars of how we provide those capabilities. And it's all centered on your data, and your data can exist as part of an integrated ecosystem. We talk about, the sharing of data across interagencies. There are elements where we're looking at third-party suppliers. We're looking at Internet of Things, unstructured, structured data sets, it growing and sprawling across a myriad of environments and platforms, whether it be on private or public or hybrid cloud environments. What's key to the data management platform is first and foremost backup and recovery. How do I back it up? How do I recover it? How do I leverage the simplicity, the reliability, and the flexibility in a consistent way, irrespective of where my data sets may be sitting across those cloud, virtual, public, and or SaaS-based platforms? Cloud mobility is about flexibility. I've got it today on-prem, or I've got it today in the public cloud. How do I flexibly be able to move the data sets, the applications, the systems, and the services in between those clouds, whether they're multi-cloud? So how do I move it from Azure to GCP or GCP to AWS if I need to? Or how do I bring it back on-prem? Not just because it makes sense to based on a certain set of parameters and conditions, but also if I need to do disaster recovery, disaster restore. If I need to be able to restore from the cloud on-prem, how do I do that flexibly from a mobility perspective? And we'll take you through that. When you look at the management of risk as you move towards a hybrid multi-cloud ecosystem, that third really important pillar is around monitoring and analytics. I need to have a central view of how I consistently and predictably manage my applications right down to my bare metal and provide the necessary analytics from an operational context, irrespective of where they're sitting. Now, it was relatively easy for me when I had it in one or two data centers within a private cloud environment. But now I'm moving applications that have codependencies on infrastructure services that are sitting on-prem, on infrastructure services where my applications are sitting in SaaS-based environments, or on services that are sitting between Azure and AWS, Azure and GCP. How do I make sure, as the owner and the custodian of the overall operations and management of that service, how do I make sure that I'm getting all the right view and visibility of monitoring and management from an application to bare metal perspective? Orchestration and automation, that's a big one around disaster recovery, business continuity, services continuity. How do I manage and ensure that I'm managing the risk of if I need to invoke disaster recovery scenarios? How do I ensure that if I'm focusing on particular government services, that I can ensure services continuity? As I transform the applications, the systems and the services into an integrated ecosystem, all of a sudden my ability to make sure that I can meet the requirements in the event of a disaster invocation scenario, in the event of having to initiate or instantiate a business continuity or services continuity scenario, how do I make sure that those applications sitting in Google can fail back over to on-prem? How can I make sure that if I lose particular services that my Azure applications are dependent on, how do I make sure that I can fail them over effectively to keep the service running and make sure that citizen access and third-party accessibility to those services is maintained in a highly available state? Or if I need to invoke a failover or I need to invoke a disaster or service continuity failover scenario, what is my recovery time? How do I ensure that I get those services back up and running as quickly as possible to make sure that the citizen customer experience is maintained? Governance and compliance, that's all around managing risk and cybersecurity exposure, data leakage, data privacy, and data exposure, particularly around ransomware. When we look at cybersecurity as a government service focus, it sits as number one 2020 trend, is managing the challenge around cybersecurity. I think that's been reinforced, of recent weeks where, the government has come out and issued a $1.3 billion investment and set of initiatives around cybersecurity and making sure that government service agencies are managing their risk appropriately as it pertains to cybersecurity exposure. And we're seeing that across the board in terms of front-end application delivery controls and penetration exposure into environments that, that make sure that government services aren't adversely impacted in terms of being shut down or penetrated, right through to making sure that, ransomware, malware, exposure to data privacy and data breaches. And that's a big spot that we play in being able to make sure that under a 3-2-1 strategy, we can protect your data. We can give you 100% air gap protection in making sure that no matter what the level of exposure is from a ransomware perspective, we can recover your data very, very quickly. Then there's the management and monitoring aspect of it. When we look at our Veeam 1 tool sets, we can integrate the ability to pick up potential ransomware attacks within your environment. Based on a number of algorithms and intelligent diagnostics, we're able to issue an alert and automate suspected ransomware activity on particular areas of your environment, applications, systems, data sets, and then be able to initiate a set of automated functions that says, we think one particular DC or one particular set of applications or VMs are being impacted by a potential ransomware threat, and then instantiating a set of automated actions. Do you want to snap a backup copy? Do you want to make sure that we fail over those data sets so they no longer become impacted by ransomware? So a really big focus there. So let's now move into, what we look at when we start looking at, aspects of our cloud data management platform. I've taken you through those on the previous slide. When we start looking at those 5 core pillars. Now let's look and take a quick view and a quick brief of how that relates to the Microsoft integration points. And I know that Microsoft strategy within federal government and government service agencies alike is a very, very strong focus area and probably has the most heaviest weighting of strategy as it relates to hybrid multi-cloud ecosystems for government environments. So where does Veeam, Data3 and Microsoft play in terms of being able to deliver you strong technical integration and capability? The first one is around Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 for Azure. And I'll take you through a brief element of detail technically of how we deliver that. Cloud tier to Azure, being able to leverage the Azure platform for long-term cloud data retention. We do it better, stronger, faster than all of our competitors because of the way in which we've architected and costed the solution that doesn't have vendor lock-in, that gives you complete flexibility around ingress egress costs and allows you to flexibly manage and automate what and how you're pushing data to the Azure cloud, as well as be able to granularly and flexibly restore from Azure. That completely minimizes the costs associated with data that you need to get back. Direct Restore to Azure is the capabilities that help manage the risk around what you have on-prem, and with 2 clicks within the Veeam console, being able to migrate those workloads irrespective of where they're sitting and the hypervisors that they're sitting on into an Azure-based platform. And then we've got native backup, our ability to natively back up Microsoft Azure infrastructure as a service components, and our ability, first cab off the rank, to be able to back up native Azure virtual machines. And so we'll talk a little bit and briefly about that, as we look at Office 365. Huge one, particularly through COVID-19. When we look at education, government service agencies, we're just about to finalise one of the world's largest implementations of Office 365 that's sitting right here with a government service agency within Australia and New Zealand, all predicated on and based off, a COVID-19 transition, leveraging Office 365, the Office 365 platform in a much more important way to a plethora of government service agencies with which it looks after, as well as moving data and making sure that they were managing their risks around protecting that data because it was now core to their business. SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, and very, very shortly Teams, the ability to quickly recover and protect data sitting in those platforms. And that's where, Data 3 plays a huge part in that, because you can be leveraging Data 3 to provide those services, or move to Data 3 in terms of them as a managed service provider, whereby they have an environment that's underpinned with Microsoft Office 365. Let's focus on that second one, extending the data center to Azure, looking at the business challenge of being able to take away investments in on-prem with having to scale out your storage array investments to maintain that exponential growth of your data, and leverage cheaper alternatives of storage natively within an Azure-based platform. Leveraging Cloud Tier, being able to add Azure as a very simple, easy to manage extent as part of your overall data management lifecycle. You can automate the movement of data from on-prem into Azure and put very simple automated policies in place that allow you to move data as it relates to your policies into an Azure-based platform, and even more importantly, flexibly restore it in a very granular way based on any requirements. Let's now have a look at rehosting workloads. So application migrations, replatforming, being able to look at what you have as traditional VHDX formats, VMDK formats, if they're sitting on vSphere platforms. How do you right click and with 2 clicks to the cloud be able to move that in an automated way into Azure? Well, we have direct restore to Azure capabilities built within the platform of VBR. You just right click, select move it to Azure, and it will go through a set of wizard driven processes connecting to your Azure storage account and automate the migration and the movement of that workload. Very, very good for managing that third pillar of migrate and managing the risk associated with, well, what do I need to do to plan for? Will this run? How much will it cost? Let's look at that last one, and that's the native backup. Our ability now, as you're starting to build out native Azure-based services, native Azure-based workloads, we can now, through the Azure Marketplace, with the integration of a Azure Marketplace appliance, natively back up your Azure-based workloads. So again, shifting into where you've got native public cloud workloads sitting on Azure, we can natively back them up and hook into the Azure snapshot. Let's now move into the partner-centric model. And when you're looking at hybrid multi-cloud, you can see there, you know, the partner ecosystem as it relates to technology partners means different things to different government service agencies. You're all making different investments in your technology stack. You're all making slightly different decisions around what your hybrid multi-cloud ecosystem looks like. The number one differentiator from a Veeam perspective is when we're looking at the technology stack, we provide a lot of integration at an engineering layer as well as at a organizational layer that allows you to manage your risk around a multi-hybrid cloud ecosystem that's made up of different technology stacks. And it also then allows you to flexibly decouple and not have vendor lock-in if at particular points in time you want to make changes around certain elements of your technology stack, depending on where you want to host your applications, data services, and workloads across those different clouds. Core to all of that is then how you manage that technology stack through a hybrid multi-cloud transformation with an organization such as Veeam in combination with Data3. Driving out those partner services and managing the risk in the transformation is incredibly important, and we work very closely with Data3 as part of the technology vendors to make sure that the development of the plan and the execution of the migration is made in alignment with what you want in terms of managing your risk profile. Kat, I might just cut over to you now and sort of, you know, move into the wrap up and also go down a path of Q&A before we drive into summary.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks for that. So really, I've been taking notes. I've got some interesting questions from that. So thank you for the really detailed, in-depth overview how Veeam tackle that for their customers. I think one thing I do want to ask, and this is probably a question for you and those on the call, and maybe also Rob, who I think is on the call as well. I just want to talk a little bit about agency obligations, because I know there's one, you know, there's that beautiful digital transformation, the ideal that we all want to reach, and then there's also the obligations that we have to meet so that we don't make it into a Senate estimates at any point around that maturity level 3 and being fully compliant with what ASD requires of us in this really new space. I guess the question I would ask of you and Rob, but also of our audience here is, in terms of your obligations in this space, what barrier do you think is, what is your biggest barrier there? What is the biggest, I guess, blocker for you in terms of meeting those obligations, be it technology, be it process, be it, I think that would just be really interesting to get some perspectives on that. And
Yeah,
also just to add, sorry, Rob, I thought I would also just add, so we had a question also to wondering if we could understand where Veeam backs up to in, is it in Australia, and what security classification applies to that backup location? And Rob, you might be able to answer that anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So the good thing is we allow our customers to put in their own Azure credentials within the console, and when we're doing backup. So when we're doing, for example, Nathan touched on the direct restore to Azure, we're restoring directly into their tenancy wherever it's sitting. So generally it's in Australian Eastern Central 2, I think, which is the federal government procured protected zone for Azure. So we can restore to any zone or any location that they actually want to connect to, and that includes their Azure storage accounts as well. So we just use whatever tenancy that the customer has. It's all built into the platform, and it's all completely visible from within a direct restore capability, or when we're looking at setting up Azure Blob or Azure Files or Azure storage accounts for you know, to send backups to for that long-term archive. So, but touching on also around what you're talking around the compliance around the Essential 8, there's also the information securities manual that we need to comply with as well. And I don't know if everyone knows, there was an update to that recently in June. So a big part of the Essential 8 was to give you the ability to be able to test your backups. And so for that maturity level 3 process, and we do that really transparently using Veeam Data Labs, where we can spin up any backup point in time into a virtual lab environment to be able to run tests on that virtual server or on that application, to making sure that when we need to press the big red button and recover that in its entirety, we know it's going to work. So that's a really big thing that we've been doing for a long time, and it's a really big differentiator for Veeam that we can do that really quickly and easily. But the latest release for the ISM that was released in June 2020 is around being able to conduct vulnerability scans for systems at least monthly. So that's moved from annually to monthly. So that is a really big benefit, for Veeam customers, because we can do that natively with VMware and Hyper-V. And but what happens when you move those workloads to Azure or to the cloud? Using Veeam external repository capability and native backup that we can use for Veeam, for AWS and for Azure, we can quickly spin those workloads up that are running in Azure and quickly spin them up, for example, within a VMware environment, and run those vulnerability scans on those workloads as we need to, essentially. So what Nathan was talking about in terms of that data portability and moving those workloads to the cloud, we can still help you, achieve those ISM compliance and recommendations, as well as Essential 8 very simply, very quickly and easily using Veeam.
Thanks, Rob. And I think I'll translate a little bit what your answer there as well, in that I do think that, so I didn't know that that was in the June update. So I think that there obviously is a really big challenge for agencies in keeping themselves up to date on that requirement, and also having a technology that is flexible enough to support what the ISM requires when that update is released. It's definitely a challenge to do that as well in an emerging technology space, which cloud arguably very much is. I guess my other question would be, so for personal interest as well, the cybersecurity element that you both sort of touched on. I guess a broader question, again to our attendees and to yourselves, around the ransomware threat as it exists within Office 365 and cloud. And I'm asking this as someone who maybe it might come across as a dumb question for those who are very immersed in this space, but how much of a threat do agencies consider the ransomware attack in the cloud space to be? Is it still a very present threat? Is it something that you've experienced even? What any thoughts on that, I guess, that you could share for our attendees here? And then we'll probably wrap up.
I think with the momentary pause, Rob sort of says, "Is Nathan going to answer that, or is and vice versa? Am I going to answer that?" But what I'll do, I'll take it from a more national context, and then allow Rob to drill down into what that means for FedGov and ACT, which is his primary patch. So in short, yes, absolutely, governments are exposed. Governments have been impacted. We only have to see some of the things that publicly are in the media, but also too, there is a ton of incidences that don't get reported from a public perspective. And so certainly as a data management company, we have a lot of customers globally across every single industry vertical, across every single market segment, be it cloud, SMB, commercial, enterprise, or government, being impacted by the ransomware risk. It is a top of mind, front of mind challenge as part of the overall cybersecurity exposure, and it requires a number of different elements to mitigate the risk from. But when we're talking about it from a data management perspective, the first thing is making sure that you're able to prevent the impact and consequence of a ransomware attack within your environment. And when it relates to data, it's making sure that you've got a 3-2-1 strategy with an air-gapped copy, number one, first and foremost. The second is about user education and making sure that they're not clicking on links. A big part of it is education. So whilst you've got the front-end systems driving the prevention, you've also got to invest quite heavily in education of your staff and your employees to be making sure and look out for those types of things that can potentially expose them to a ransomware attack as part of internal penetration, so to speak. Then what you've got is the management and monitoring piece. So how overall are you doing application to bare metal specific around ransomware? And typically ransomware is about high IO activity. When you've got ransomware encrypting data and injecting malware into, taking that data, typically it's around high IO because it's taking unencrypted data, getting access to it and encrypting it with a key that then, renders it inaccessible by you as the internal owner. So being able to have intelligent diagnostics in a management platform that says this is a ransomware attack, or at least it's suspected because it exhibits all of these types of activities, and then having some built-in intelligent diagnostics that's able to build up patterns around, you know, that particular type of activity is also very important, as well as then your ability to recover. You know, we talk about NAS. We've got a very strong market-leading enterprise differentiating capability around being able to do point-in-time restores around NAS, being able to very quickly, you know, increase and mitigate against, you know, impact and consequence based on recovery times using, you know, point-in-time restores. That's the short of it. And, you know, absolutely, we're heavily invested in government service agencies that are, you know, future-proofing their platforms specific to the ransomware use case. I've just gone around and done an Asia Pacific Japan virtual webinar series with a former FBI agent that's, you know, very heavily focused on ransomware and, you know, how that's transformed with organised crime now.
Yeah,
thank you, Nathan.
And that's right. And so with the Office 365 backup capability, we allow you to create that offline backup for Office 365. You can store your backups anywhere. So if you wanted to move that Office 365 data in that backup location, you know, if you wanted to put it in Azure, that's completely supported. If you wanted to put it in AWS, it's completely supported as well. A lot of customers also put them on-prem because Microsoft don't actually charge you egress charges to back your data up from Office 365. So it also provides a really good cloud exit strategy. So for, you know, in the instance that Microsoft Cloud platform, you know, goes down, we can still do recoveries directly back into Exchange on-prem. So being able to, you know, augment that data protection strategy for, you know, Office 365, which still is susceptible to ransomware attacks. And we normally show videos that shows an Office 365 email account getting encrypted by ransomware. So unless you've got the top level of protection within E5 with Office 365, you're not really covered as a part of that ransomware protection that Microsoft provides. But even though it's still a good idea to have that insurance policy to be able to make sure that you can recover your data if it does get encrypted or falls into the wrong hands or gets accidentally deleted, for example. So all of the security policies in place, you know, can still the right rogue admin can still go in and remove and delete a lot of files and, you know, things within Office 365 that may not be picked up within, you know, a short amount of time. So we give you that insurance policy to be able to back up your Office 365 data, store it offline that doesn't have any access from any other Office 365 admin, and create that Essential 8 Maturity Level 3 compliance around backups.
Thank you, Rob. I just wanted to wrap up because I think we've just hit our time and I can see a few people need to drop out for other meetings. I just wanted to, a bit of housekeeping. There is an Uber voucher. Normally we would host an event with, like, you know, food, lunch and stuff. So we did offer as part of this event, you know, it's essentially just the Uber voucher for you to get the same experience, so to speak. So those will come through to you after this event. And we really want to thank you for attending, and also thank you so much for participating in the discussion. It's always really interesting to hear your thoughts as well, and I'd love to be challenged and have a really open discussion about these issues. And hopefully, if there's anything that you want to follow up on as a result of this webinar, you'll reach out to us and we can work with you on that. There are some resources that we can provide you. They're basically readiness assessment resources that you can work through yourself, and they actually return a little document that sort of gives you a high level view on what your readiness level might be and how you might be able to address that. So we'll share some resources following this event as well. But thank you so much to Nathan and to Rob for your time today, and thank you for our attendees for joining us, and hopefully we will follow up and hear back from you very soon.